Hey gang, welcome. Thanks for joining me again today. Let me finish a little bit more oil stick and then get official. Hello, my name's Dan. This is Daily Art Adventure number 768. So the name of this little village is called Oberlin Village. So it's Oberlin Village painting back in my studio. I started this, maybe some of you saw this past weekend, out in the parking lot, in the cold parking lot outside Art of the Carolinas. Had a great time in spite of the cold and sometimes rainy weather. Had a great time seeing a lot of good old friends. But it is nice to be back in comfort. Next best thing to plein air painting is indoor air painting. All right, I want, I think, a little bit more blue up here in the sky. So I'm doing my normal, which is pretty much any time that I'm going back into a, not always, but most of it, the great majority of the time, when I'm going back into an oil painting that's dry. The last time I painted on this was 2 days ago, so it's good and dry because of the liquid and other things that I have on my palette, like my titanium whites at this point are still all alkyd titanium, which means fast dry titanium. So I just finished teaching 3 classes, and my apologies for the quality of some of those broadcasts. I hope that I'm going to be able to do an edited video here shortly, where I basically give you the content of those 3 classes, or whichever ones are needed. I don't know if I need to do all 3 or not, but I might. Anyway, one was on painting trees. One was called learning how to abstract your way into good painting, by which I mean, if you're a bad drawer, can you do good paintings even until you learn to be can you do good paintings before you can do before you're a good drawer? My answer is yes, if you understand, most basically, if you understand the rules of abstract painting. So, and then the 3rd class was a good old drawing, how to see like a drawer, how to draw. Okay, I think that's all I want in blue. Now I want to do some warm glazes as well. So I'm picking up Indian yellow and a little bit of some kind of orange. I don't know what kind. Doesn't matter much. So if you want to definitely want to give these trees back here a good boost of color, energy. Right. I'll worry about cleaning up those brushes later. Yes, I want to do a little bit of drawing here. this car right here needs a little bit of correcting. So before I proceed to paint, let's get this car's anatomy fixed up a little bit. Pretty boring for you guys, I'm afraid. Forgive me for just a minute. Look at all this right-handed drawing, one-handed drawing, because I'm holding the reference in my other hand. And you may ask me, well, I thought you liked to paint with two hands. I do. And yes, holding a pencil, brush, whatever, with one hand like this, it is truly irritating. It drives me crazy. So try to keep it to a limit, keep it to a minimum. All right, and then I've got a boy riding a bicycle here. While I was downtown, while I was on location taking photographs, a couple boys actually came along. Looked like they were on the way home from school, riding bikes. So, ooh, perfect. Yes, let's add a cyclist. It's a nice element. Yes, the tongue is sticking out like crazy. Exactly. And driveth me crazy. All right, maybe that's enough. Hello, Jane. Hello, Uncle 60. Hello, Michael. Hello, Carolyn from Sydney. Welcome. Good to have you here. All right. So I'm back to final edit layer, quote unquote final edit. And the final edit used to be the final layer, but several subsequent layers have developed in the last couple years so that it's no longer quite accurate. But I still call it, because this layer indeed bears the burden of being the final edit. Everything after this is just sort of icing on the cake, perhaps you could call it. And I say all the time, for anybody who's trying to be influenced by me, this will be the problem layer for you. I mean, I hope not, but chances are, for most of my students, this proves to be the make or break layer. And the reason is, it's especially for anybody who is an intermediate level painter who's painted a good number of paintings before. When artists like that, like when I'm teaching a class live, it is artists who have some experience who have a hard time doing this, because they have a very hard time keeping it light. They tend to overdo this layer. And instead of letting much of the underpainting show through, they tend to plaster as I cover up way too much. So anyway, there you go. If you're trying to do, God help you if you try, if you're trying to do my style, my technique, just be warned. This is the hard part. And the reason, again, another way to put it, the reason it's hard is because at this point now I am painting like a traditional oil painter. You mix up paints you mix up the color you want on the palette, and then you put it on the canvas, right? What could be so hard about that? Well, if you're using my technique, what's so hard about that is you don't want to cover up all the hours and hours and hours of work that you've done up until this point. You don't want to cover it up with the traditional, ordinary, opaque stuff. So that's where people have a difficult time. Question?
No.
Okay. I'm in the process right now of, maybe you can see, of painting, hey Susan, of painting the star of the show is this little building. I don't know if you, let me explain a little bit. I could show the photograph, but there's two streets, one going down that way, one that way. These buildings line up on this street. These buildings line up on this street, but this building is at an angle to the intersection. Many, many years ago, it was a gas station, one of those old-fashioned gas stations. Thank you. One of my fellow artists outside Art of the Carolinas this week was lamenting the fact, which I agree with, lamenting the fact that such a charming little building is wasted on a dry cleaner. And I agree. Those things do happen, don't they? I guess whoever can pay the bill gets to, rent the building. Even if it doesn't quite rise to the aesthetic level many of us would prefer to see in a charming little building right at the core of this little neighborhood. Again, the neighborhood is in Raleigh, North Carolina, inside the Beltline. Which I learned last week actually has an acronym among realtors in the area. It's called ITB, Inside the Beltline. And that means something. It's the high rent district of our fine city. I just mixed up some dark yellow-orange color so that I can get in here and paint a number of the traffic signals. In our part of the country, traffic lights from the back are yellow. And also the same thing, there's crosswalk signals there and there, traffic lights and traffic lights. Oh, and then one more crosswalk over here. So it gives me an excuse for a nice little bit of pretty intense yellow. It will look good. This is definitely an autumn fall painting. That was suggested to me by my client. This is a commission painting. The owner of these buildings is paying me to do the painting of his neighborhood. And he thought that perhaps a fall scene where there were fewer leaves on the trees so that we could see more buildings. And I agreed with him. Unfortunately, when we had that conversation, it was only a couple of months until the fall time of year. So here we are. We're in that nice moment of autumn, fall here, where the weather's turned crisp often, as it was this week. It was a little bit beyond crisp, I'd say, this week. And the leaves are turning, but they haven't all fallen off the trees yet. So we're that nice stage where there's still foliage on the trees. It will be gone in a couple weeks. All the leaves will be gone. Oh, you guys are chatting up a storm. Let me go back. Hello, Mr. Nelson. Uncle 60 says, very formal. How do I glaze over the darkest colors? Well, if indeed the colors are too dark, then you've lost the opportunity for glazing. Because indeed, a glaze makes everything darker. But it's pretty rare for a glaze not to have some impact. So you can do any color you want. And that's part of the beauty of doing a glaze on top of a painting, an oil painting that's dry. You can try something, put something down. Just make sure it's transparent. Don't use yellow ochre. Most yellows are quite opaque, especially yellow ochre. So avoid those. Indian yellow is the only one that's really transparent. Anyway, put something down, and if you don't like it, then wipe it off and try it again. I actually did quite a bit of that the other day. I don't think I was broadcasting at the time on my my recent Charleston painting. I did glaze after glaze after glaze. All right. So I just I wanted to do this building. And you see the diagonal, it'll be more pronounced when I do the mullions in the window down here. But that shadow, very important for that building. I'm trying to decide where to go next. I did a little bit of sky the other day, opaque blue sky. And a little bit of tree the other day. Now I've glazed over all that now. I'm standing back with my finger on my chin, literally. I'm either going to do the sky again, sky next, light pale blue, or the white. I think I'll start with, I'm really anxious to do the sky, but I'm going to do a little bit of white first. When I say white, I mean the building, the brightest part of this scene is the sun hitting these white buildings. That one, that one, that one, that one. So I'm mixing up a little bit of Naples yellow with my titanium. Naples yellow, probably, one of the reasons I have it on my palette most of the time is it is such a convenient way to create a warm white, a very, very pale warm white, because it's already so pale. A lot easier to handle than say trying to mix a yellow with your white. right? If you mix a cad yellow with your white, you're going to get bright yellow. That's when you're trying to mix up a warm white. Generally speaking, you don't want yellow. You do not want whatever Easter egg yellow or whatever you might want to call it, bright electric yellow. You want sort of a muted yellow. So Naples yellow makes a very convenient alternative. I don't know if you are seeing or if you saw right then my hand, my left hand at the moment, make those like it's doing right now. Little jiggles, little wiggles. Let me repeat something I've said often, but I think it bears repeating. Wait, before I do that, I need a photo reference. Forgive me, hang on just a second. I think I can pull up these pictures, I hope, on my backup phone. There's some parts of this image. There we go, that I couldn't quite make out. With the photograph that I'm looking at. Anyway, the little wiggles and jiggles that my hand, you know, even right there is pretty subtle, pretty slight then. Unless I miss my guess by a fair margin, which I don't think I do, unless I miss my guess, I'm going to guess that those little wiggles and jiggles, sounds like the little lady who swallowed a fly. Anyway, those little wiggles and jiggles are precisely what drive some of you early journey painters crazy, because your hands do the same thing, and you get irritated with your hands because they shake. Thanks for answering that question, Susan. I believe whoever asked it, I think you answered it correctly. Liquid, and then later, I'm still using liquid. This painting does not have enough layers in it yet to require Neil McGilp. Anyway, back to the shaking hands thing. As I said, unless I miss my guess, I'm guessing that many of you early journey painters get mad at your, literally angry at your hands because you think that they're not supposed to do that, and you think that good artists, that their hands don't do that, that their hands are perfectly still and controlled. And I would love to, what's the word, disillusion you on both counts. More than that, more than just do my hands wiggle and shake sort of involuntarily. Even more importantly, It is, in fact, that exact wiggling and shaking that creates good marks. Let me back up now. The essence of good painting is making interesting marks. I say that all the time. Every time I say it, I go, inside I say, oh man, good grief. And saying it is so easy. Doing it, discerning, learning. And I've worked with many students over the years on a repeat basis. You know, they're some of my local students are frequent flyers. And so I've had time to work with them and observe their progress, and saying the interesting marks is the essence, and then actually knowing what doth an interesting mark make are two very different things, and by no means natural, intuitive, quick, easy, fast. So let me answer the question to some degree anyway. So what is an interesting mark? And here's the good news. This is not the complete answer, but some of the best marks your hands are going to make are in fact the marks that are made involuntarily by your hand shaking, wiggling and jiggling. So some of you who are quote unquote cursing your hands need to stop that, because it is in fact the wiggling and jiggling that your hands are trying to make you a good painter, and you're getting mad at them. So let me, the opposite of, so that's part of the reason why, by the way, that many of you paint like this, tongue painting, right? Because this eliminates as much as possible those wiggles and jiggles. And again, you are irritated, and again, you suffer under the illusion that the hands of good painters don't wiggle and jiggle. That is ridiculous. If there is skill involved, but the skill is that I know when, how much to make the wiggles and jiggles work for me. So anyway, that's what you need to do. All right, that's enough of that for the moment. Let's just keep on. There's been a lot of chats going on. Let me lean over here real quick and just see. Hello, Light Blue. Good to have you back. And Light Blue, I'd like to understand what you mean by, you say, sometimes I see a lot of palettes with a lot of old colors. I don't know what you mean by that. Do you mean dried colors, or do you mean like colors from the 1800s, with old colors? Why do some artists keep adding colors on top of the old ones? Oh, okay, I'm sorry, you come clear. I say later, are they too lazy to clean the palette? Yeah, I think, Susan, I think your answer is exactly correct. Mostly too much of a hurry. Hello, Ricky and Lucy. If you can't paint, that surely means you can do something else. Never tried painting. Well, you never know. And Tomas says, have you tried any pastel painting? Absolutely. Yes, and good. Hello, Monique in the Netherlands. Good evening indeed. And Uncle 60 gives a good recommendation for keeping paint fresh on your palette. I put my paints in the freezer, generally between uses. So that keeps my paints from drying up. One time I had some paint in a freezer for over 2 years with several layers of saran wrap on it in this case. When I got them out, when I was finally ready to finish the painting I was working on, almost all the paints on the palette 2 years later were still good. They'd been in the freezer the whole time. And they worked with saran wrap on top of them. As I recall, like 3 or 4 layers of saran wrap. I knew, for some reason, I must have known it was going to be a while before I got back to it. Anyway, yeah, clove oil, good solution as well. I've never used it, but I like the idea. And light blue, I would add one tiny little answer to Susan's excellent answer about why do artists keep piling up paint. And I think there's all, it's kind of funny, and I can't prove this. There's a little bit of a status symbol. It's cool if you're an artist to have a palette with piles of old paint on it. By the way, I don't think you can see my palette at the moment. I'll turn you down for a second. So here's my palette. As you can see, it's glass. So on frequent basis, I take a ruler. That's not a ruler, that's a razor. I take a razor and clean it off, and that works for me. Also a heavy, and I've got a board on the back of it and aluminum edge holding it together, and so it's fairly heavy, which is also an advantage for plein air painting, because the wind will absolutely, a good gust of wind will pick up a wooden pallet and send it flying down the block or down the mountain, as the case may be. So I quite like my heavy glass, 1/4-inch glass. So, you know, it's relatively speaking rather heavy. My client for this job, the man for whom I am doing this commission, the other day, 2 days ago, he asked to see a photograph of the painting in process, which I was glad to show him, although I will tell you, as you can maybe imagine, it made me a little nervous, because he's not an old follower of mine. He doesn't know how I paint. And it turned out okay. He was not alarmed. But as you may know, the great majority of, whoops, you know what, gang? I have to plug in my phone. We're about to die, and it might get a little bit noisy. I'm sorry about that, but it can't be helped. So we might get some static now, but better than losing contact. The great majority of people out there in the ordinary world, people who are not artists themselves, they literally have no concept, and I don't blame them, of course, but they literally have no concept of how an artist, much less a weird artist like myself, they have no idea how an artist paints. In fact, most people in the Western Hemisphere, I would say their point of reference is Bob Ross. That's how they think artists paint. You know, 25 minutes, 5 minutes, and you have a happy little tree. Another 3 minutes, and you have a happy little squirrel, and so on and so forth. And so they're certainly not accustomed to seeing the real rough and tumble of a good painting process. It's the analogy comes to mind of, you may have heard it before, You know, if you like sausage, don't ever watch it being made because it will ruin your taste for sausage. That's a little bit like this. A little bit like my painting process. If you like my paintings, and you have a vested interest, that is to say, you're paying me to do a painting for you. By no means, unless you understand art, which if you're not an artist, how would you? Don't watch me paint because you may lose heart. I experience this quite a bit when I'm doing wedding paintings, and the mother of the bride will come up to me an hour and a half into the reception and say, "Well," I'm sorry, it sounds like I'm mocking the people who pay my bills, the mother of the bride or whatever. "Well, the groom doesn't look, his nose is a little funny." I do have a hard time not overreacting to such things. Anyway, then my client did get back to me, and he did not seem terribly alarmed, so that was a great relief. I was literally afraid he was going to say, "Let's hold off on that painting. I'm having second thoughts." Whew. Believe me, it has happened. I have discovered an interesting, sort of on this subject a little bit, and this is the kind of lecture, life talk, if you will, that I love giving to young people. I don't know if anyone else has discovered this or not, but there's a strong correlation between, I just realized there's another place for a shadow right here, diagonal shadow. Strong correlation between skill in one area of life and skill in any other area of life. And what I mean by that is there are a number of people who will remain unnamed. That's funny, I'm being facetious. Category people, not named people, who go through life without developing a terribly high degree of skill in much in particular. And very often those people, it seems to me, have a hard time relating to skill in any arena whatsoever. Whereas, and I want to get off that subject quickly and say, on the other hand, on the positive side, a person who has achieved a high degree of proficiency in one area of life often, now this is not a hard and fast rule, but I've noticed it, and I think it's generally correct. Often that person seems to have an intuitive understanding of many other skills, in many other areas. And I didn't prepare this. This is not a lecture I've prepared ahead of time for. Now it may be that I'm addressing here specifically physical skill, such as Major League Baseball player, major athlete, highly skilled athlete can relate to a highly skilled musician because they're both physical skill. I'm not sure that this relates to many people have skill at creating wealth. They just are walking, talking money makers, but it's not at all physical. So I'm not sure. Anyway, be that as it may. And I have no point. I'm not making any point here. I'm just ruminating mostly on the interesting fact that people who are highly skilled in one area of life often have an intuitive sense of what another highly skilled person had to go through to develop those skills. Anyway, I'm a little bit worried about this topic and where it's going, so I'm going to drop it. I'm going to drop it right there. I do not stand prepared to defend any of the comments I just made. I just think it's interesting. At the moment, I've got a neutral, warmish gray on my brushes. And as you can see, I'm doing the shadow side of some of these white buildings. Uncle 60, good question. Uncle 60 asks, would I start a beginner painter on my method or on a more typical? And that's a very good question. I'm not sure the answer. I'm not sure how I would answer that, but I will anyway. I've been called upon over the years many times to teach an introduction. Hang on just a second, I need a little funny operation here. I'm not sure, but this line is vertical, so I'm gonna pick up a T-square. Yeah, it's as I thought. It's not quite vertical, so I want this line to be very vertical. There's a little bit of optical illusion or something going on that was distracting me, making it hard for me to see. Here in our local Raleigh, North Carolina, the Jerry's Artorama store, I teach there on a frequent basis, and a couple times a year I'm asked to teach an intro to oil painting. And when I do that, I don't teach them my method, although, and I try to make it clear when I'm teaching, I say, no, some part of the time when I'm teaching today, I'm going to be teaching you Dan Nelsonisms. And other times I'm going to be teaching you pretty universal, fairly universal oil painting, and that's how I approach it. So I try to draw a distinction. If I had a gifted young person, say high school or college, gifted young person, and I was going to teach them over a period of time, there's no question I would teach them my method, but trying to make clear to them at every point, you know, when I was in fact teaching them. Now this, you know, this is germane to me. This is unusual to me. This is my idiosyncratic approach to painting and so forth. I would try to make it quite clear. But I would teach them the principles that drive my painting technique, which is that the overriding principle is the magic of transparency. I would enthusiastically teach them against the opacity of the 20th century, which in the grand sweep of art history is the aberration rather than the rule. The painting straight out of the tube, opaque, opaque, opaque. You know, if the planet and the race survive, which I expect they will, as you know, I'm a flaming optimist. And in centuries to come, people will look back at the 20th century in many respects, but I think they'll look at it in just this one respect, that the painting of the 20th century was overwhelmingly opaque, and I think they'll look back at it as a bit of a dark ages of painting. Thank you, Clement Greenberg and company. Google him. He was one of the main trumpeters of the canvas is flat, which I don't rail against that. That was a important lesson to learn, especially after the invention of the camera, which I do think had an impact on the art world. But yeah, I think so. I would teach a student the principles, if you will, of transparent painting, the magic of transparent, why to do transparent. Now there's many different ways to do that, not just my way. But yeah, I would teach them quite emphatically against the opacity of the 20th century. Ooh, that's looking kind of pretty. It's looking like a building. Speaking of pretty, which but just by the way, in case you guys don't know it, okay, I'll finish that sentence first. In case you don't know it, if there was somebody, say, with an MFA degree watching me, which I certainly do not expect, but if there was someone with a Master of Fine Arts degree watching me right now, and they heard me utter the word pretty, what the word I use is triggered, they would be hyper triggered. They would scream, cover their ears. I'm exaggerating now. They would scream out loud, cover their ears, squint their eyes, and throw their device across the room. And proceed to curse me in their hearts, because the word pretty is such a, and of course I don't usually use that word, partly for that reason, because I don't want people breaking their phones, you know. I care about you, really I do, deep down. Facetious, that's facetious, very nice, facetious, I'm sure you do. But why did I say the word pretty? There was some reason. Oh, I said this, the building is looking real, and then I was going to say that I'm doing quite a bit of really interesting reading these days. A couple people in particular, Rollo May, famous psychologist, I think is the right term, from the mid-20th century, wrote a pretty significant book on art and beauty and aesthetics. He wrote it, I think, in 1985. That's been interesting. He says some really good things. Not everything he says is I agree with, but he says some good things. Another one is Madame L'Engle. I don't even know how to pronounce her name. It's Madame L'Engle. Madame L'Engle? L'Engle? Forgive me. There's my lack of French. Therefore, lack of class coming out. Also, and I've just started her book, some very interesting things she has to say about art and beauty. And again, someone with an MFA, after they had just finally picked up the broken shards of their phone, they just threw it down again because I said the word beauty. I was going to say earlier, I've discovered, I didn't realize, a couple years ago I gave a talk in a small circle of friends. I gave a talk on modern art. I took some of the thoughts from the book that I've been working on for years now, and it's quite an auspicious circle. Virtually everybody in this 20 people or so, if everybody's there, and virtually every one of them is a published author, and they all have master's degrees. In many cases, even their spouses are authors and have master's degrees. So it's quite the highbrow gang, if you will. We get together periodically. But as I tried to describe for them the realities of the art world, I discovered, sort of to my surprise, they were mostly, not all of them, but mostly completely oblivious to the state of fine arts, which surprised me a little bit. All right, hang on just a second. Let me step back again. Look and think. I've done an awful lot of tight painting here in the last several minutes, haven't I? There's a little bit of antidote to tight painting. Now, you understand anytime you scratch like that, there's not some like rule that says you have to keep all the marks you just made, right? I know that's kind of dumb. I just want to point that out. Doesn't mean I can't come in here and clean up a few of those scratches. All right. So I guess I'm going to take a minute and clean up my palette. So since I talked about it a while ago, light blue, I just saw that comment. Ricky and Lucy, the non-artist, I'm enjoying your comment there. Just watching other artists work, eh? Nothing wrong with that.
Are you broadcasting?
And light blue, yes, Susan answered your question perfectly. Now, do I ever use a mall stick? Yes, yes, yes. When I'm doing one of my wedding portrait, if it's a wedding painting, if it's a typical wedding painting, it entails a portrait, the heads of which are usually about this big. And so when I'm doing that, I do indeed, you do tongue painting. Hold the brush like this, hold them all and then go like this, because I'm doing a realistic portrait that big, which is frankly insane, but I do it anyway. And now it's part of my product. That's what people expect. But yes, other than that, Susan has answered you correctly. I do not use a mall stick. Using a mall stick is pretty much synonymous with holding the brush in the wrong grip. Right? You don't use a mall stick when you're brushing like this. And almost all of my painting, except as I say, like the details in a portrait, all of my painting, I'm holding the brush side saddle and painting with the blade, the side of the brush, not the point. All right. I think I'm going to go back up into the sky now. And I'm thinking, is Sam still here?
Yeah.
Is Nana here?
No.
Really? Okay. Okay, I'm going to try to mix up a very pale, lots of white, and a little bit dirty, that is to say, not perfectly blue. I didn't clean these brushes. There was still a little bit of dirty white, brown in them. Let's warm that up a little bit with Naples yellow. I suppose someday I may figure out a way to do 2 cameras at one time and let you see my palette. Frankly, I think most of the time shots of my palette are pretty boring. Okay, now one of the classes I taught this past weekend was how to paint trees. And I said at the very beginning of the class, it's the first time in my life I've ever taught at a class entitled How to Paint Blank, the blank being a noun, how to paint a thing. First time ever. And I think it's obvious is because so many early journey painters do landscapes, and most landscapes entail the painting of trees, and of course, being early journey painters, most of the paintings, most of the trees are rendered very poorly. So, thus the exception to my normal rule. I don't like, like I've seen classes how to paint a birdhouse and stuff like that, and I'm sure that has its place, and I don't mean to knock it, but I am not wired to do that kind of teaching at all. That's just, nope, I won't. That's ridiculous. Anyway, so I was teaching how to paint trees, and the overriding principle that I tried to convey to my dear students, was that painting trees is a matter of process. You don't paint them all at once. You paint them layer, and I said this, layer upon layer, upon layer, upon layer. Step by step, stage by stage, little by little, the tree emerges out of the mess, out of the mist. And in fact, what I'm doing right here is a good example of that. Because, well, I mean, that's, what layer am I on? I don't even know, 8, 9. And I'm far from finished. No, I shouldn't say far from finished. I'm a couple layers from finished. But it's especially pertinent because the other day when I was outside in the parking lot, I have actually already painted. I've already done this. What I'm doing right now, I already did it once. That is to say, I've already done pale opaque blue down here in this part of the sky. So this is the second time I've done pale opaque blue on these trees, which is just a good example of how do you do trees. The answer is layer by layer, stage by stage, step by step, degree by degree, not all at once. I hope here in the near future to do an edited video for you. It would be part of my Landscape Masters series. It would be a 10-minute, probably several 10-minute videos where I basically give you the content that I taught this past weekend about how to paint trees. I would enjoy doing that very much, so I hope I can carve it out of my busy schedule. Let me point out that one of the other things that's happening right now is there are a lot of telephone wires, power lines, whatever you want to call them, wires, lines going through the sky on this painting. There are quite a few in the photograph. Here, let me show you the photograph just for a minute. So there's the photo. Can you see it? The closest one's right there, going that way, then higher ones going that way, then further ones that way, then down here more. And I've talked about this before, even though many non-artists or photographers, for that matter, might not consider utility lines to be particularly aesthetically pleasing, so they would in fact be inclined to excise them out of the scene. I more often than not do include them in my painting because they're beautiful abstract marks. And let me raise you up to see the top of the painting again. This is not a huge amount of sky, but a fair amount of sky, I would say. And it would be very bad, I'll go that far, it would be very bad if this was all solid blue. So the utility lines that I'm putting in the painting right now are actually serving me very well to break up the monotony of that blue sky. Now, of course, you know, some of you are already saying, well, you could have put clouds up there. Yeah, okay, well, two things. Number one, I am going to put utility lines because, as I showed you in the photo a moment ago, they are, in fact, I feel like, germane to the scene. They are part of the visual fabric of this little neighborhood. So it would be quite phony, in my opinion, to do a painting and take out the power line. So, but you are correct. I could do clouds instead of power lines. The fact is, I will probably do both clouds and power lines. But one of the things I want to point out in particular right now is the technique that I use often, very often. I'll put it this way. How do you paint skinny lines or skinny objects? How do you paint skinny objects with fat brushes, so to speak? I mean, these are not exactly fat brushes, but they're pretty fat compared to the lines that I'm painting right now, right? So I am in fact demonstrating to you right now the answer to that question. How do you paint, let's say, in this case, how do you paint skinny telephone wires with fat brushes? And the answer is, in the underpainting, you slap down a fairly, like, let's look at these up here. I'm not ready to paint up here yet. See how, in fact, up here, and I slap down, of course, more than once. How do you paint power lines? The answer is layer by layer by layer. So there's a red, big fat red one, then there's a purple one, then there's a pencil one, then there's a blue one. So at least 5 different lines across there. And when I am ready to do the blue sky up there, I will cover up some of those marks, turning them into skinny marks at the same time. Now, I need to be careful here because it's real easy for me to, I enjoy this kind of, you know, I've called it before, picture window, hard-edged abstraction. I enjoy it so much that I tend to overdo it, so I need to be careful. In fact, not to overdo it. So stop talking to me for a minute. I'm being facetious. I'm not talking about you talking at all. I can say, but I should seriously consider stop talking to you while I keep my wits about me. And then some of the lines that I'm painting around, like this pencil line, which is curved, and these orange marks, those are not intended to look like power lines at all. Those are just abstract painter marks. So I know that would cause a great deal of confusion to many early journey painters. I'm going to eliminate this mark. So right now I've got way too many lines. 1, 2, 3, 4, before I get to the big one. 1, 2, and they're too evenly spaced. So I'm going to choose choose out which ones do I want to blot out to eliminate. And I think it's that one out. Again, when I say blot out, please notice that doesn't mean I get mad at it and wipe it from the face of the earth, so to speak. No, that would be a waste of good marks. So I'm simply diminishing, same thing with this one right here. Diminishing it, but I'm not angry at it. I'm letting little bits of it continue to show through. Is this making sense? And again, this will go under the overarching heading of not plastering. Now, these, I have 4 now. I've actually ended up with 4 marks, 1, 2, that are quite equidistant, equally spaced from one another. So I'm going to cover up that one. So that one I did wipe from the face of the earth. Painting, such a violent activity, eh? All right, I'm getting tired of working up there, so I'm going to move somewhere else. In fact, in just a minute, I'm going to be tired of working on the sky altogether, so I will work somewhere else. This, by the way, is very close to my focal point, so this will probably be my tightest part of the sky as the painting goes out. These lines up here and up here in the corner will grow progressively more abstract as I get away from the focal point. Yeah, I've had it up to here. I've had it with blue sky. So without cleaning my brushes at all, I'm just going to pick up some yellow and pick up some green and do some work on some of the green foliage, some ultramarine blue. Again, maybe I should show you this, but I don't think it's very interesting, frankly. This, maybe I'm wrong about that. Okay, but while we're on the subject of green, we are on the subject of green. Did you catch that? Okay, while we're on the subject of green, my most common mantra when it comes to green is a very dangerous color. That term, in fact, was coined by my friends, my monthly painters group, Painters Forum, that has been getting together, some of us, for over 12 years. That term was coined by them. 12 years ago. It was one of the first little community expressions that came out of this meeting. Green is a very dangerous color. Let me explain that a little bit, just in case, God forbid, there's somebody out there who's never heard this rant. I guess I should have turned my camera down and let you watch me mix. I'm still not happy with the color that I'm getting here. Getting close. So I'm trying to get a dark, dull green. Now what I've got is too blue. All right, nope, now it's too intense. So hit it with some more raw umber. I'm sorry, you folks, I should have. And I have this, every once in a while this happens. I mixed up so much paint with my brushes that my brushes just became besotted, loaded with way too much paint. All right, so I have a fairly dark, dull green on my brushes. And there's several plants here. I'm going to get back to green is a dangerous color here in a minute. There's several plants down here. A hedge here. A hedgerow, perhaps? a bush that's either grown or been trimmed, I don't know which, to be controlled, if you will. And I'm applying a very thin scumble, really, of dark green. Now, where else do I want this? There is some of this. Oh, by the way, so look at me. I am breaking a rule. Take note, some of you, you will hardly ever see me do this. Every rule can be broken. So the dark green on my brushes right now is opaque. It's not a transparent green. Got it? It's got some yellow ochre in it that has made it fairly opaque. And one of the rules that I break least often is you get dark with transparent and light with opaque. So if you want some part of your painting to be darker, you use transparent paint. But right then, here's why this is worth writing down. On November 19th, 2019, Dan Nelson used an opaque paint to get darker. Why? Because I can get away with it, that's all. And I know I can get away with it. And of course, I'm not done with that zone. Anyway, that's all. Some of you are wondering, what, that was it? What, that was it? Yep, that was it. It was such an unusual event. You newcomers are unaware of that. Let me repeat the principle, and then I still have to get back to green as a dangerous color. But one of the most, again, part of the magic of transparency is if you want any part of your painting to be darker, to get darker, you make it darker by using transparent paint. I'm not going to go into all the reasons why. I just want to let you know that that is the truth. That is the reality, and right at the moment I am violating that, which is quite extraordinary. But I'm doing it because I know I can get away with it, because it looks good. It looks good in spite of that. In spite of the fact that I'm breaking the rule, it looks okay. Partly because I'm doing it so lightly too, by the way. I'm just scumbling, just hinting, just scratching a little tiny bit of this color. All right, that's pretty boring talk. Let's get back to green is a very dangerous color. I have heard it said, Uncle 60, me or the impeachment. If you want beauty, escape, run from the politics. And that's funny. I've heard it said that the human eye can discern more shades of green than any other color. I'm not the scientist, I couldn't prove that, but I wouldn't be surprised. That makes sense to me. As an artist, it jives with my experience. Now I'm trying to decide how much of this lecture to get into. Some of you've heard the lecture so many times, so I will not go into great length. There is something about the color green that makes it aggressive. It makes it come toward the viewer, rush the eyes of the viewer. Green is aggressive. Green comes toward you. Now, I happen to believe that it is because, again, I'm going to mix up a paler green right now and come back and paint on top of some of what I just put down. If you all remember that your eye, your retina, as far as I understand it, by no means an expert, but you know, I paid attention in 10th grade biology. The retina has two kinds of cells, rods and cones, and the rods see value, see light and dark, and the cones see color, right? So what I think happens is that is generally true, but that there's a spillover effect. The rods see light and dark, and the cones see color but to some degree the cones picking up on color bleeds over into lightness and darkness, and the color that is interpreted by your cones as the lightest, lightest color is in fact a pale green, pale chartreuse, light, or even, you might want to call it a fluorescent green is the lightest, brightest color that our eye can perceive. And again, I think what's happening there is that the rod function, the part of our retina that sees light and dark, is being usurped, if you will, overrun, is being bled into by cone function. So the cones are also seeing light and dark, and to the cones, green is the lightest, brightest, whitest color. And I can't, again, I'm not a scientist, this is just my observations as a sensitive viewer of nature. You know, school in America, at least in North Carolina, school crossing signs are chartreuse, bright green. Likewise, many emergency vehicles like fire trucks are pale green. And I have done, it's been a long time, I need to do it again. I remember leading a bunch of young people in an experiment many years ago in a room where we had a very sensitive lighting control. We could dim the lights. The very last thing to disappear in a room was a pale light green. Chartreuse is the name for that, pale light spring green. So, you know, a decorator person might call it spring green. That was the last object in the room to disappear before everything went black. Anyway, so that's, I'm going to, by the way, mix up again. So I've done dark green, then medium green, I'm going to do lighter green. So green is very aggressive. And paint manufacturers don't seem to have much sympathy on us painters. Maybe with the one major exception of chromium oxide green, which is a very dull green. Paint manufacturers seem quite happy to produce, and I'm being kind of facetious here, of course they should produce. They produce many very intense colors of green. And that's fine, but just as an artist, you need to remember you don't use those. Rarely do you use those straight out of the tube. Most of the time, in fact, and if you're an early journey painter, just get in the habit of any time you pick up a tube, I say, or pick up a swab of green paint with your palette knife or with your brush, and you're about to put it on the canvas, mix orange with it or red. In other words, the complement, the opposite. In fact, a couple years ago, I proposed to a paint company that they, in fact, create, I'm not holding my breath, and that was only half serious. They asked me for my opinion, and I gave it to them, that they created a tube of paint called plein air green. And my theory would be it would save a plein air painter a little bit of time in mixing out in the field if they would mix, go ahead and mix reddish brown with their green. So it would be a very, very dull army green. Again, the closest I can think of to that right off the bat is a chromium oxide green. But even then, that's too green, and that's a very opaque color. Anyway, so green is a dangerous color. Be very, 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 very careful with green. What I mean by that is you kill it, you knock it down a bunch. In most cases, way more than you think. I'm, again, not an expert on this, but I remember, I think it might have been David Dunlap, old friend who was with us here in North Carolina this weekend for the Painters Forum. You can look him up, David Dunlap. Pretty bright fellow. I think he said that the landscape painters, and for some reason I was when he said it, I was thinking of the British landscape painters, and I can't remember now if that's literally the case or not. But anyway, he was saying that those artists back then literally did not see the color green the way we do today. Now, I don't know how you could prove that, but that might be worth a Google search. Have humans adjusted in their perception of the color green, and when you look at a typical 19th century or 18th century English landscape, there's often very little, sometimes no green in it whatsoever. Even though it's got green grass and green trees, the whole thing is brown, 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 brown. Interesting. That's all I'm going to say about that. I'm tired of that subject now, aren't you? And I find myself just in a little bit in need of a break. Nope, not a potty break this time. I know that's what y'all were thinking. Although I wouldn't tell you even if it were. I'm in need of a little, just a rest. I need to paint by myself for a little while. I know, of all the nerve. Can you imagine? Who do I think I am, painting without you? Yeah, it's the ultimate in rudeness. It doesn't happen very often, I confess. It does not happen very often. Usually when I'm painting, I'm broadcasting. So what I'm doing before I go, then I'm doing little bits of green grass. I wasn't really focused on grass earlier, but there's grass in various places along here. Hey, let me point out just for fun for a minute. You see this orange streak right here. That's very recent, and blue up here. You can see this blue right there. Those are abstract marks. And as the painting continues to develop, I am perceiving them as very pleasant abstract marks. So they're almost certainly going to stay. I might carve them up a little bit, but I won't obliterate them. As I say so often, I'm not smart enough to paint good, but I'm smart enough to spot some good painting when I see it and then spare it, keep it, leave it, don't obliterate it. And that there's a lot of truth in that statement. There's a lot of truth and only some little bit of bad grammar in that. Before we go, I'm doing, again, a little bit of light green on top of the illegal dark green that I did earlier that I was talking about. And I said you should put it on in your diary. Dear diary, today I saw Dan do some dark opaque paint on his painting. What is this world coming to? But now I've almost repented completely of that because I've covered up much of that with a light green, which, yes, I knew I was going to do that from the get-go. So that's part of the reason why it wasn't such an offensive thing to do. Whoops, I went off on you, didn't I? I did a little bit of painting that you couldn't see. Sorry about that. A little bit of green up, light green up here on top of these trees. Sorry about that. All right. With that typical mistake, I'm going to wrap this broadcast up. Let me see if there's any comments I just have to get to before I go. Nope, it was the last one I got. Whoop, have you lost me? I don't think so. 5:10? All right, I think we're still on. Bye, y'all. It's been good. Appreciate your company. I'll paint for a while and maybe more broadcasts tonight. I'm not sure. No, my wife are going out for dinner with friends, so probably no more broadcasts tonight. Okay, sayonara. Bye-bye.